This week, a major bank, UBS, just issued a warning that the US has a 93% chance to go into a recession this year in 2025. Now, if you've been watching my channel for any given length of time, you know that we've actually been in a recession likely since the middle to late stages of 2022, when inflation really became a problem. But it seems like the mainstream economists and banks and media are only just now starting to catch up with this. But I'm very interested to see why they think this, because I feel like it's about time. So recently, global investment bank UBS announced that after crunching some hard data from May through July of 2025, that there's a 93% chance the US enters a recession this year. And their forecast is based on its assessment of several objective economic indicators like personal income, consumption, industrial production, and employment. Sounds familiar. Sounds a lot like the things we've been talking about here on the channel. And a lot of other banks are saying that even if we don't get a recession, which obviously we are already in one, based on people's spending habits, based on people's behaviors and how they are using money, which we'll go a lot into later on in this video, it's pretty obvious that we are already in a recession. But even if the numbers never make an official recession appearance, there's never a declaration of an official recession in the US this year, one thing's for sure, which is that we are going to be hitting a 1970s style stagflation economy. It's basically already here, guys. Anybody who saw my jobs video the other day talking about how basically no one's hiring right now, and when you minus government jobs and healthcare jobs, there's essentially been zero job creation for the past 4 to 6 months in the United States. And now we got this government shutdown that might make things even worse depending on how long it lasts, which we'll talk about a little bit later in this video. We got unemployment sitting at 4.3% right now, functional unemployment sitting at almost 25% in this country, and we already have more job losses in 2025 as of August than we saw throughout the entirety of 2024. And for anybody wondering, today I am in Bayfront Park here in Mill Valley. I've never shot a video here before. You can kind of see the water behind me. We'll circle back and go by the water here in just a minute. As of September, the government figures are showing that unemployed workers have now outnumbered job openings in the US for the first time since April of 2021. And when you combine this with the UBS report, it has become obvious that we are in some sort of a recession, guys. A lot of people even think it is the next depression, which it definitely could be, because the thing that I think is going to make it a depression over a recession is just how much everybody's standard of living has been going down and will continue to go down due to inflation, because most people do not own enough assets, do not own enough gold and silver to really hedge against inflation that's just been ripping apart people's budgets. And consequently, people are going to have to make tougher and tougher choices. Like the other day, we talked about how a lot of people are sleeping in their cars, they're living with exes, they are giving up food, they're skipping meals just to be able to make their housing payments. That's a downgrade in your standard of living. If you have to get rid of something essential in order to pay one of your bills, that's a downgrade in your standard of living. There's a few things that you need to do. Number one, you need to get liquid, meaning that you have some liquidity in your finances. You want to make sure you have a 6 to 12 month cash emergency fund in a high yield savings account right now. If you don't have that, that should be your number one priority besides paying down high interest debt. And this prevents you from having to sell your investments. It prevents you from having to dip into your retirement accounts if you meet hard times financially, and you can still stay afloat while trying to secure employment or pick up business elsewhere. You also need to have a budget and stick to it. If you're questioning whether or not you need a budget, then you probably do. The only people who really don't need a budget are the people who earn enough money that they don't have to keep track of every single penny that goes in and out. If that's not you, then likely you do need a budget. Something I already kind of mentioned, but I will say it again, is you need to pay down debt, all different forms of debt. get out of every single kind of debt that you can possibly imagine, except for your mortgage, unless you have a high interest rate. Maybe you have a 7% interest rate mortgage, then maybe it makes sense to pay off the mortgage if you can. But if you have credit card debt, if you have a personal loan, if you have student loan debt, anything that requires you to make an extra monthly payment, an auto loan, get rid of it right now. The less expenses you have and the more you can increase your disposable income in recessionary times, then the higher likelihood you're going to make it through without a hitch. And if you must sacrifice different payments in order to make another payment, like for example, you should be prioritizing your mortgage or your rent payment. You should prioritize your auto loan payment and kind of put other payments on the back burner, like your credit card payment or maybe a medical bill, something that can wait a few months. And if you go delinquent, it's not going to crush your finances or leave you homeless or leave you with a repossessed car and no way to get to work. You also need to have a backup plan. In case everything you're doing right now falls apart, you need to have some sort of backup plan. What would you do in case you do lose your job? What would you do if you can no longer afford to make your rent or house payment? Who would you move in with? How would you make up the difference to be able to get through that tough time? Also, it doesn't hurt to be bringing in extra income, having some sort of a side hustle, bringing in an extra $300 to $500 a month minimum on top of your regular job. Anything like that will help in times like this. Now, in the past, Mark Zandi from Moody's Analytics, he has always been very bullish on the economy over the past few years, saying that there's no recession, there's nothing to see, nothing to worry about. Well, he's been changing his tune a lot recently, saying that now he believes that 1/3 of the US economy is already in a recession. Well, what happened, Mark? Why did you change your tune? It's starting to get real enough for you guys to realize that this is happening. Meanwhile, for the average person with their feet on the ground, they've already seen this happening for the past 3 years now. Now, in the past, I usually disagreed a lot with whatever Mark Zandi had to say, but in this case, I actually think he's got a point, because he says, just look at these top 2 states in our country, New York and California. California makes up 14.5% of America's GDP, and New York makes up for almost 8% of America's GDP. So between just these 2 states, it's like 23% of the GDP in this country, which really just comes down to spending, because we know that about 70 to 80% of the GDP is all just based on consumer spending. So essentially, California and New York alone spend 23% of the nation's money in order to keep this economy going right now. And those states are falling on hard economic times. In fact, California right now has the highest unemployment rate in the nation. The analogy that he uses is like, if the American economy is a 3-legged stool, New York and California are 1 leg of that stool, and if you kick one out, the whole thing's going to come crashing down and tip the entire country into a recession, which means that maybe we will actually see it reflect in the official data by the end of the year or by the first quarter of next year, which would be kind of incredible, guys, because I've been of the mindset recently that no matter what happens, they're going to have the data tweaked in a way where it's never going to reflect an official recession ever again. But maybe I'll be wrong. In fact, I hope I'm wrong. I hope that our books are not that cooked where it can never reflect a recession ever again. We also have roughly 21 states, including Washington, D.C., that are experiencing negative economic growth right now, putting them into a technical recession. States like Minnesota, Delaware, Washington, and Virginia could all be experiencing the brunt of the ongoing trade war, while D.C. has experienced significant job losses, especially now, which we'll talk about in a little bit, due to the government shutdown. However, I don't want to put too much emphasis on that because they typically don't last long. The last time Trump was president, we had a government shutdown that lasted 35 days, which I think was a record. But still, it's only a month, guys. Really, all they got to do is agree on what they're going to be spending the money on, and it's going to be back in business. It's not like it's going to be shut down indefinitely. But then in contrast, you have 16 states like Florida, Texas, Nebraska, and Arizona that are still expanding right now and are still relatively healthy economically speaking, which is kind of interesting because, the southern states are the ones that are holding up the best economically, but they're also the ones that are seeing the biggest problems with the housing market and are seeing the largest supply problems of inventory, as well as the biggest reduction in prices. But at the same time, what is that? That's a good thing, right? For the overall economy. That means that more people are going to be able to afford a house in these states rather than less. So a lot of people kind of look at home prices falling as a bad thing, especially if you're a homeowner. But the reality is it's a good thing. But besides California, over on the East Coast in New York, there's been a wave of layoffs also hitting Wall Street as major investment banks start to cut back on staff. And even if you live in one of these states where things are going relatively good, I still think it's important to be prepared for a downturn, guys, because think back to 2008. Everywhere was affected on some level, right? And it depends on how tied to any given sector of the economy that you are personally, right? That also makes a big difference of how things are. Like, for example, I'll tell you this. I moved to Miami Beach in 2008, January 2008, like right when the GFC was really starting to happen, And I could already see how bad the economy was getting in Illinois, where I had lived my whole life. But once I moved to Miami Beach, it really wasn't that obvious that we were in a major recession. I worked at a really popular sports bar and it always seemed to be full. People were always coming in, drinking and spending money. And I was making more money than I ever had in my life there. You guys can see it's been t-shirt weather here in Marin County, but we're going to be going back to sunny days pretty soon. Still beautiful weather out here. But the contrast between being in South Florida and Northern Illinois during the same period in history was kind of striking. But for example, if you were a real estate agent or you were a real estate investor in South Florida, you were getting killed with the recession because home prices had come down 50% in Miami and nobody could sell homes if their life depended on it. Nobody had money to buy anything for a while. It was just an absolute nightmare. Defaults were rampant. So it all depends on how exposed you are to which sectors of the economy, on how all this is going to go for you and what your experience is going to be like. But it doesn't hurt to be prepared using the measures that we talked about earlier in this video, and really that I talk about every single time I tell people how to be prepared. You have to own gold and silver, guys. You have to be out of debt. You have to have at least more than one source of income, whether it's from a side hustle, investments, whatever, something. Just ask the 750,000 people who are not going to be working anymore from the federal government, people who have been furloughed since October 1st. And these furloughed workers are not going to be paid until Congress passes legislation. Only essential workers at the military, TSA, actually have to continue working without pay. Can you imagine that? They're telling you, well, you'll lose your job unless you continue working without pay, but we don't really know how long it's going to be until you get paid. Well, if you are somebody in this position and you work at one of these government agencies, then it's okay if you don't get paid for a month, maybe even 2 months, if you have followed my advice. If you have that 6 to 12 month emergency fund, so what? You'll be fine. You have that emergency fund, you can pay your bills, continue working, and then once things get back on track, the government's going to pay you all of your back pay and you're going to be back to square one. Instead of digging into debt, using your credit cards, using buy now, pay later loans to get things done, that's the worst case scenario. People who are not prepared, who haven't been saving money and haven't been preparing for the recession that we've already been in for 3 years, are worried about missing a mortgage payment. They're worried about losing their homes. They're worried about being unable to pay for food and their medical bills. But they shouldn't be, especially if you're a government worker. A lot of government workers make decent money. Some of them are reportedly already turning to gig work like Uber and DoorDash or borrowing money from colleagues because they're not prepared. I mean, why do you want to put yourself through that? Why do you want to scramble for cash at the last minute and try to figure it all out rather than just put a little bit away every time you get paid and be set when something like this happens and not have to freak out? In fact, some government workers who are unemployed right now are actually in favor of the government shutdown because they want to push back against the cuts they want to make to health insurance and federal programs. So they think it's a good thing that there's a stalemate right now. But I'm sure the only ones who think it's a good thing are the ones who have money stashed away for a rainy day right now. People who are scrambling, trying to do gig work already on day 2 of the shutdown are not feeling as optimistic. And this might actually be an opportunity as well for the Trump administration to fire a lot more government workers. You know, we don't really know what's going to happen or what kind of deal they're going to come up with, but a lot more people could end up losing their jobs because of this shutdown. To me, I think the whole thing is very pointless because somebody made a comment the other day, which I thought was hilarious. And I apologize, I don't remember who wrote this, but it was something like this. It was very funny and really kind of summarizes the whole government shutdown situation. Imagine you're in a car speeding off the cliff and you're in there with your buddy, and instead of worrying about falling and crashing to your death, you're sitting there arguing about which radio station to listen to on the way down. Well, that's kind of what they're doing right now with this government shutdown. We have so many bigger problems to worry about, mainly the national debt and the deficit spending, and inflation are our biggest issues. And they're sitting there splitting hairs on what we're going to spend all of this borrowed money on, when in reality, they should be talking about how we could be cutting all that spending altogether and not be borrowing any of this money to begin with. But I'm telling you guys, this recession is already here. All we have to do is look at the job market. I know I've been hammering this home a lot lately, but there's been so much to talk about. Like this, for example, there were 17 million job openings in September, which is down 17.2% year over year, according to Revelio Labs. And seasonally adjusted job postings were at their lowest level in at least 3 years. And job openings saw the steepest drop in professional and business services industry, which saw openings decline a whopping 31.4% year over year. You know something's definitely broken with the economy when you are seeing job openings fall by 32% year over year. I mean, that's a huge drop in just 1 year. I think that's why guys like Mark Zandi are finally starting to get with the program and realize that the recession is real, because now it's really starting to show up in some of the official data, whereas a lot of people, you know, with their boots on the ground, just like me, and don't have their head in the clouds, have realized for a while that this has been a brewing issue. People have realized this as soon as people had to start taking on more debt to pay bills. As soon as people realized that, hey, I can't comfortably afford my house payment anymore because my taxes and insurance and costs to maintain the house have gone up too much too fast. And if you're looking for a job, forget about it, because hiring is at its slowest rate that we've seen since the Great Recession. Employers have announced plans to hire about 205,000 workers so far this year, according to Challenger Gray and Christmas, which is down 58% compared to the same time period just 1 year ago. Think about that. 60% less hirings going on right now than just 1 year ago. That's the lowest number that U.S. companies have planned on hiring ever since the first 9 months of the year of 2009, which is when we were in the heart of the great financial crisis. And so far, they're not even calling this a crisis. So far, they're not even calling this a recession. Yeah, UBS is predicting a recession. Mark Zandi is saying that maybe we'll be in a recession if one more leg of the economy falls out, but it seems like it's already fallen out. You also have employers firing people at the fastest rate since 2020. U.S. employers have announced 946,426 job cuts so far this year, according to the Challenger data. That's the highest number of planned job cuts for the year since 2020, when a total of 2 million job cuts were announced over the first 9 months of the year. And of course, we're in the middle of a worldwide pandemic then. They're saying it's very likely that the planned job cuts are going to surpass 1 million for the first time since 2020. And previous periods with this many job cuts occurred either during recessions or what we saw during the GFC. So we are in great financial crisis times right now. That's what they are saying. But nobody has called it official yet. So my question to you, and something I want you to think about after watching this video, is what do you think the economy is actually going to look like by the time the government actually calls this an official recession? How do you think things are going to look? Unemployment-wise, people not having the money to pay certain bills, spending patterns, people going into debt. How do you think this is going to go? Because I think by the time they come out with an official declaration that we are in a recession, it's already going to be a depression. That's what I think. That's really where I think things are headed right now. But if you've been smart and done some of the things that we talked about in this video, the truth is you will be fine. But the problem is a lot of people don't do it. They wait until the last hour of the last minute when it's too late, once they finally lose the job and now realize I have to scramble. And by then, you already have millions of other people trying to do the same thing. Just ask anybody looking for a legit job right now and see how that's going. But it doesn't have to be that way if you prepare. So if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.